if you're a person that likes to help build things and wants to pick up a shovel, pick up the paddle, and go, like, this has been an amazing place to be, rather than just someone who, if you just like to consume things that have already been built, you know. You can do that here now more than ever, but it was like, that was the thing about the community for me. Like when I thought about leaving, it was like, yeah, I could go someplace that's already been made, or you could try to help make something, and man, it feels a heck of a lot different.
Well, welcome back to Neighboring. I am in one of the coolest spots in Fort Wayne, a place that has a lot of culture and a lot of experience built into it. We are with Matt Kelley of One Lucky Guitar, and Matt and I go way back, over a decade. Matt's been in the advertising and creative world for forever, his entire professional career for the most part. And he and I connect on a lot of reasons, and so I thought he would be a perfect person for Neighboring to have a discussion on the small places and creating experience, and ultimately what it looks like to start things. I find that many people get stuck, and they have really great ideas in the neighborhood or in their workplace or for the community, and they have really great ideas, but they sit on the shelf because they don't know what to do with it. They don't have confidence. They see things in the community that are so big or popular or successful, and they just don't quite have the vision of how their thing can be successful, but they're great ideas. And Matt is one of those guys who has had idea after idea, and not just ideas, but ideas that he's moved on. And so we often sit down and have these conversations about what does it look like to create the cultural, the events, the things that create culture. And it often looks much different than what the bigger events or the bigger world is sharing. So Matt, welcome to the Neighboring podcast.
Excited to be here, yeah.
Introduce yourself, tell us about Matt Kelley.
Yeah, so we are at the One Lucky Guitar offices in our conference room, which we call the Bside. It's kind of interesting being here right now at the beginning of September of 2019. This month marks our 15th year in this building, which is really wild to me. So I guess tell you about myself, I would say I'm an observer that time flies. And you got to try to make the most of it, you know. And so I think that's been something that's really driven a lot of the things that I've been involved with, or we've been involved with as a company from a starting things standpoint, is seizing the moment, a bias for action, a bias for maybe taking some risks and trying things that haven't been tried before. But yeah, background in commercial art, and as a college student, English lit, commercial art degree, worked at a large marketing firm, went out on my own with One Lucky Guitar. That was really the first thing I started, and it kind of started as an idea of something that could operate in a realm of passion, and then it turned into a business. And since then, we've served clients all across Northeast Indiana predominantly, but really across the country. And our team has grown to a team of 11. Worked out of my apartment for 4 or 5 years, and then, like I said, been here for 15.
Describe your office. Give the listener an idea of creative space, your space here.
Yeah, so we're at 1301 Lafayette on the near southeast side of downtown Fort Wayne, and it's a great space. It's a building it's a multi-tenant building that's always had really creative industry in it. So commercial photography, fine artists, journalists, independent journalists, yoga studios, 4 different yoga studios over time. For us, they've been great neighbors. We really kind of all inspire each other. There's kind of a culture of the building. But I think our space has been one, kind of up and around the corner here is where the team works. But we don't have dividers. We have space definers, we say, but it's a real open environment where, I want people to be aware of what each other are working on. There's kind of a shared sense of certainly shared victories, but also like how can I help you? You know, it's not, people don't really work in silos here, and that's been something we've really, you know, worked hard to make sure we feel very unified. In fact, the space behind me at one point, this is where the kind of designers, web developers were in this space, and the accounts and account service area was up top, and just that kind of felt like two teams in a way, right? It was 5 people here, 5 up there, and it was just like, man, I want to feel more unified than that. And that's when we kind of expanded our space, and then that created the Bside, really.
Yeah, you've grown in this space. You've had a small corner kind of piece of this floor, and then you keep kind of growing and expanding. And I know over the years you have questioned whether the space still fits One Guitar's culture, the people, the space needs, working at it with the landlords and those types of things, and you've considered moving away, but I always know that that's a difficult conversation. And you always kind of come back to this place having kind of a soul and an identity that's uniquely related to your own, and so that you kind of dig in and you recognize the place has an important part in that. What can you share about like why you've kind of maybe stayed here in terms of space having an importance?
Yeah, well, you know, lots of thoughts on that. The space is kind of intrinsically cool because it's, you know, the building we're in right now was built in 1910. It's really 2 buildings shoved together. The other's 1890, and so you have lots of exposed brick and hardwood and the cool ceiling. And so, like, that fits kind of what we do, you know. I mean, I think our ethos has always been really scrappy, and even very early on, kind of an Americana vibe to the design that fit. But I think, you know, when we've looked elsewhere, it's really been part of just being so committed to this community. I think part of probably particularly downtown story. Like, I think we've been part of downtown story, and I've just thought, you know, we rent. And so for me, it was like, man, you know, I believe in this community, and I want to, you know, have a stake in it. Let's be property owners. And so that's when we've looked at places. It's like, you know, to really demonstrate our commitment, would it be more important to be a property owner? And each time we've looked at that, it's been like, you know, what are there pain points with this that's taking away? And, you know, there really haven't been enough that, you know, like that make it worth doing that. Yeah. And, you know, I mean, I'll be frank, like we're not in the heart of downtown. You know, we're kind of outliers, like geographically, and I like that, you know, and I think that feels like us. And that's been one thing that's been really interesting is, you know, some of our, you know, peers in our industry have moved downtown or whatever, they're right, you know, in the city center. Like, I kind of like being outliers.
Yeah.
It fits us.
Well, I think that's a good point to transition to where this conversation really started, and a concept I've really been trying to work out in my own brain and having conversations around is that the idea that the magic in our community, the magic happens in the margins. And that means a lot of different things, but the idea that the margins are the places just on the outside or in the corners or in the alleys or in the extra shared conference space and a 150-year-old building as part of an ad agency. And I don't think anyone that has experience with ad agencies would really think at like, oh, you have a music venue as a creative agency in your space as being out of line. But the fact is you do it, and not every creative agency does that. And that says something as well. Tell us about the Bside and the transition of like, you don't have a shortage of things to do. Why begin hosting shows and all the different things that end up happening in this space?
Yeah. Well, you know, I think you're absolutely right that there's that place and space can create, you know, magic. You know, when it's really good and nurtured, it can just change the, you know, the kind of the well-being of a person. Like, what's the invisible things that are happening around a collaboration or an interaction. And we've found this space to be one that just is really, it's just very nurturing for connection, right? And so that's true with our primary work as marketers. We'll stage what we call soul sessions, but they're kind of branding workshops in here, and there's a vulnerability that happens in those, and there's a safety that happens in this space. but it's been true with artistic expression too. And so we, there's a whole kind of underground industry in the touring music business of living room shows, and that's artists that don't want to play kind of the traditional infrastructure of a club or a bar and everything that goes along with that, and they'd rather play an intimate show with diehard fans. And we started getting some of those living room shows. We'd reach out and say, hey, it's not a house, but it's an office. We can move the desks. And those just created such special moments that those artists really told their friends, like, man, we've never gone to Fort Wayne because there was never a place to play where people would pay attention or hang on every word. This is 7, 8, 9 years ago. And so we get calls, 4 or 5 times a week about shows. And we only book the ones that are like, someone here loves it, right? We all money goes to the artist, and so it's not a money-making thing for us. And then the other thing is like, that's our taste, but there is something special about the room. And so we've found folks who have a unique idea or something they want to present. And if it kind of aligns with the values of One Lucky Guitar, we've just have given the space to them. And so that could be contemporary dance, that could be poetry, that could be fine art, visual art. And then sometimes we've had folks come in, University of St. Francis has held classes in here. Companies have had retreats in here. But to me, it's like, man, this room is like too special to just like keep to ourselves. Even though it's obviously it's a part of the beating heart of OLG, but it's like, man, let's share this. What's going on in here?
Bside is great. I've discovered several bands from coming to shows here, and there's nothing quite like being in a room with 50, 70 other people, and a room that feels full, that feels, whether it's 50 or 70 people or 500 people, when you are in a room that feels full of people that want to be there to have an experience to enjoy, there's such a transcending feeling of being a part of it. And especially with the idea of the unplugged nature of a living room show in most cases, and the story comes out, and the types of bands that end up playing are very singer-songwriter, very much storytellers or culture, like sharing something about their culture. So you always walk away with more than that, and I find that true in other places. And so if you've not been to a Bside show, I really recommend you coming to check them out, because whether you know the band or not, you're gonna enjoy the time and maybe connect and meet with somebody else. Matt, ever since I've known you, I've always admired the fact that you don't let much stop you from starting. And part of the discussion I wanted to have and hopefully communicate to the audience on this episode is, what do you do with those ideas that are kind of burning in the back? The ones that you share with other people on a regular basis who could, if they pressed you, of like, why haven't you done that yet? And I find that true in neighborhoods, like sitting and interacting with neighborhood associations or different community or civic kind of groups and around the table, and people have ideas and you interact with them, they bring up that idea 2 or 3 times, but they just let it sit there. That hasn't been your case, and I'm curious, where did that, because you've done this, you've started a boys clothing line, you've created a music festival, so I see you starting these small events, but I've also seen you really leading the charge for some bigger initiatives as well, and I'm sure those kind of have grown out of the confidence you've gained from the small events. Where did that start for you? Like, was there a time where you kind of recognized that you were just letting things sit there and you had to finally do something, or did somebody push you into it?
Well, I appreciate your kind words, so because I don't always necessarily think of myself that way. But like we were saying earlier, time flies, I guess. I think, it started with One Lucky Guitar, and so for me, I was brought up in a pretty traditional household, and my parents have been in the same house for 40-some years, and they each had the same jobs for 3 or 4 decades, and I was really the first in my family to go to college, but I didn't have anything really non-traditional in my life. Nobody backpacked across Europe or was a serial entrepreneur or anything like that. And so I kind of went into my first job and thought, okay, this is what you do, and you get in this job, and I'm at a certain point I better start looking for a house up north and get my Toyota Corolla and just get it all set, because that's what you do. And then the stuff that happened with One Lucky Guitar, and it was like I just felt an emptiness. I felt a couple things. One, the work I was doing was not as creatively inspiring as I always wanted it to be, and then it also just didn't matter as much as I wanted it to. And so One Lucky Guitar really started as a place for me to do work that fulfilled those two things. And it was originally I was going to do work for musicians, record labels, arts organizations, or folks making art, and help them visually present what they were doing. And then hopefully that would have some kind of impact to the people that love that, whether it was an event or whether it was the music. And I did that, and it just kind of it gathered attention from folks who were indifferent, who were not musicians or were not artists, but had an enterprise that shared some of those values, and they just liked the passion of it. They liked the charisma that came with it, and they would call and say, "Hey, I'm not a band, but I'm starting a clothing company," or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so One Lucky Guitar, it really started inadvertently, and as it grew, then because we were kind of approaching things, and by we, it was me. We were doing it kind of non-traditionally because we didn't have the money to do anything traditional. More and more things happened around it to where I was able to kind of grow a team, but I'd never in my wildest dreams thought I would own a company or employ people. But what I found was that we were just staying true to the vision of like, what are we going to communicate and how are we going to communicate it and how passionately can we communicate it, how we have to discover their why and then help communicate it, whether it's a band or it's a company or a law firm or, and that just created confidence, right? And it also created confidence because I felt like we were doing things so non-traditionally that I started thinking, well, you don't have to do it the way that everyone's always told you that it had to be. And those were the kinds of folks that were attracted to work with us. They'd say, hey, we're a law firm and we kind of feel like outliers in the legal community compared to every other law firm. So we want to work with you because that's how you are in your industry. And that gave us confidence to try then when we starting other things, and it was predominantly events and often musical. Our place is really music and arts and culture very often, and so we worked with the Downtown Improvement District to do a block party that was kind of unlike block party, reimagined what block parties were. And they said, we believe in what you're going to try to do here, and here's some money to go buy talent to do it. And it was really unexpectedly successful. That was in 2005, and we booked the Avett brothers, who we got them right on the way up as they were breaking through, now Grammy winners and tour the world and everything. And then that led to working with the embassy to start down the line, and they called saying, hey, it's our 85th anniversary, we want to do 2 fundraisers. One's the black tie event that serves our traditional audience. It's an $85 ticket for our 85th anniversary we've got Martin Short coming in, but we need something that exposes this wonderful theater to a younger audience. This is end of 2006. And it was interesting because it was Tom Vorney, who owns Asher Agency, who was on the board there, but they called and said, we need you guys to reach young people. And we started down the line, which was showcasing this local talent. We had local bands who were out creating original music, doing things. At that time, it was pre-Brass Rail, pre-CS3. You had to do things kind of underground. And it was like, let's showcase those people who are creating this, like you said, this art that's on the fringe. That's really the character of this community. Yeah. Let's showcase them on the biggest, most beautiful stage in the community. And to make it all kind of make sense, let's have them pay tribute to the artist that inspired them in the first place. And we called it Down the Line. It was pain, it was just this inspiration that channels through, right? And that got pretty, we ran it for 4 years, donated all of our time to do it. Got pretty big. And then it was like, okay, it's big enough and you guys can run it yourselves, so go do so. And then that's when we started saying, well, that got really big, and the headaches that come with big. And so let's start doing this really tiny, tiny thing, and that's how the Bside really started around that era. The thing that's common about each of those initiatives and what then later with Middle Wave, because we were small here, and then it was like, well, let's try to go super big again with Middle Wave. It's like, we've never gotten paid for any of that. That to me is just part of, I feel lucky, blessed, fortunate to get to do what we get to do here, and so part of that is pay it back to the community, and how can we make a positive impact.
Well, I think a key characteristic that you're pulling together is that a lot of the initiatives that you just described and outlined were connected to the kind of the personal pursuits and the ethos that you created as a leader and as an individual, like as a band member, as a lifelong musician, in your own band. And yes, you have your day job, but it's a good illustration of like, how do you do work-life integration? And I think a lot of folks have ideas that are related to really the outflowing of the thing that they can't do over here, and so it's bubbling up of saying, how do I take what I'm doing another step further, or implementing that idea. And those are really great illustrations. So it doesn't really matter whether the B-side is music or all the ideas have to be music or culture. There are people doing woodworking or whatever their other passion is, neighborhood meetings, we see this. And so the idea that the magic is happening in the margins, but are you creating those opportunities in the margins that you're in, and moving forward on the ideas, which I think is really, really an interesting kind of take and a push. Because this idea came, I was in a venue watching a show, and it's shoulder to shoulder, and I've been here, and I've been in neighborhood associations, and I've been all over these places, and I look around, and it's usually these things that don't have more than like 50 or 100 people. And then recognizing that you're in, how many of those things are happening on that day, or in that week, or that weekend, or that build on, and that is creating the culture of a block, an area of town, within a subgenre of life. Yeah. And how those things shape culture maybe more than the big things. Yeah. That the big things should be an outflowing of a lot of those small things, but do we ever really kind of hone on and recognize that the small things add just as much, if not more value than the big initiatives?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's been a common, like, what's better than when you're into something, sharing it with people who are also into it, or helping expose someone to that would love something to that. So whether that's music in a particular format or artist, or that's mountain biking, or that's making a difference by volunteering in your community, and really, doing a small thing that changes someone's life. Like, that's, as far as like starting things, like find things like that you can start, and also I think we're talking about, like, this isn't like a show on entrepreneurialism where you have to, like, I gotta quit my job to roll the dice and start this thing. It's like, what we're talking about are gatherings, events, human connections, and like in that case, I think if it's based in passion and like your heart is true in it, then it's like, man, go after it, because that's always been the thing for us. And it's like, people will be attracted to that when that's true for what you're up to, and you gotta kind of, they have to just trust you, like say, learn more about, I believe in this, and I believe you would like it, and so come join me on it. Take a chance.
Well, I would probably imagine you probably have a story or two where, to move that concept further, is like maybe volunteering and taking on a new initiative within an event like Middle Waves, which was a 2-day music festival, like choosing to volunteer or own one aspect, or driving the golf cart around to pick up the trash and like taking that responsibility. You likely had a better experience than maybe a concert goer or a festival goer, because you got into that social connectivity, and you're formed in part of a community, absolutely. And you were part of making something happen.
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of Fort Wayne, and Fort Wayne in particular in the last decade, but really probably 15 years, has been, if you're a person that likes to help build things and wants to pick up a shovel, pick up the paddle, and go, like, this has been an amazing place to be, rather than just someone who, if you just like to consume things that have already been built, You can do that here now more than ever, but it was like, that was the thing about the community for me. Like, when I thought about leaving, it was like, I could go someplace that's already been made, or you could try to help make something, and man, it feels a heck of a lot different. And that was a blessing I got early on in my career, was that I got to see that money doesn't necessarily equal happiness and or feeling fulfilled. and making a difference certainly felt more fulfilling. And so it was like, man, how do I keep finding places and opportunities to do that? The other thing, it's interesting what you said too about like the small things can really, it's the seasoning, it's the difference maker. Like I believe that too. It's been more than a decade, but I remember going to a presentation at the top of the PNC building that the Downtown Improvement District had welcomed this gentleman, Jack Murrah, who ran the Lyndhurst Foundation in Chattanooga. And this was early on when they were talking to other communities, and Chattanooga was, went from armpit of America, like worst place, to Outside Magazine's #1, community. Everyone learned from Chattanooga, and he came, and he was brazen in some of his comments, but he said, the story isn't that you have a symphony orchestra.
Yeah.
The story would be if you didn't have one, because everyone's got one that's your size, And it was interesting, like I thought, and then he talked about investing in the things that actually made Chattanooga different, and one of the early ones for them was this freshwater aquarium thing, and he's like, we were able to say we had the world's largest freshwater aquarium. We just never told anybody it was also the world's only. It didn't need to be that big. Yeah. But it was interesting because I think that coincided with like Elton John maybe was coming to the Coliseum, which I think it's a great get. Yep. But everyone was just celebrating like that. We finally got Elton John. We're legit now. And it's like, well, everyone else has always had Elton John. Like all the other communities we're looking at, and it was more. All these things happened at the same time. So those, and then this band called Titus Andronicus played at the Brass Rail on a Thursday night. Our mutual friend Nate Utesh from Metavari brought him here. And the next day they were at the Pitchfork Festival, which is a real tastemaker, trendsetter festival in Chicago. And they blew up. There were nobody here. There were 20 people at the rail that night, and I remember after that weekend, Pitchfork said the band of the weekend was Titus, and it was like we literally got to see somebody on just the last show they played before everyone knew them, and it was like, man, if Fort Wayne gets that, then that's what I think is cooler than Elton. And with all respect to Sir Elton and Sir Paul and the other big guys that have come around.
Yeah. And those are the things that I feel like we need to learn to celebrate, is that these are they don't have to be any bigger than they are. And at times there's a fear that permeates the community and especially event organizers, and feeling like, oh, this thing isn't going to be big enough, or this is competing, or these diversions can get in a fear-based pattern that it makes us feel like if our thing isn't 5,000 people, then it's not successful, rather than really encouraging that 20 people here and 100 people there, and like we need it all. Like we need it all. Like our community is a community of abundance, that we are better off from every one of these things. And the determination of success needs to be defined by the people putting it on, not by outside measures. How do you define, like, what does success look like for you at like a Bside show or some of these other events that you've been a part of, or even the clothing line at the Good Ones that you created? Like, how do you reframe success? Because I know a lot goes into success, and how we view success can ultimately depend on whether we feel like we did a good job with it. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't always mean that it made money or sold out or those types of things.
Yeah. I mean, I think you and I have talked a lot about meaningful experiences, right? And I think that's the piece. Like for me, is like that. There are more and more ways that people can spend their time in this community, and for it to be really meaningful, to be provocative to them, to make them look inward, to make them consider something they hadn't considered before, to give them a different point of view, or crystallize the lens they were already looking through. Like those are the things, like with that kind of feedback, I would have answered that question a few years ago, as we would have things where when people would say, man, I just didn't feel like I was in Fort Wayne. Yeah. And that would be like, I would say, okay, well that's how I knew it was worth doing, or it was successful, because someone, but now you thankfully don't hear that as much anymore, like then I started thinking, let's bury that phrase. When that phrase isn't said anymore, that's gonna be really awesome, But I also think, like, to your point, another measure of success is when somebody brings somebody new. Yeah. you know. And I think that we all have fear of like going to do or see something we've never done before. If I'm going to go volunteer with NeighborLink and I'm going in someone's home, or I'm responsible for, you know, their habitat, you know, like. Yeah. There's immense pressure with that. Am I uncomfortable with it? And am I going to see or feel things that are that take me out of my comfort zone? And you could say that about arts and cultural experiences. You could say that about, you know, food. Yep. You know, places that you haven't been before. An ethnic restaurant that is pushing your, you know, your experience, I suppose. You know, and it's like I continue in Fort Wayne to like. I can't tell you a time that I took a chance with something or erred toward having a little bit more of a sense of adventure than I was comfortable with, and I was rebuffed, or that I was shut down, or that I was made to feel like I wasn't welcome, you know. And that's been like huge, even with the Bside. Like I work the door, you know, I'm the guy up there, and when somebody comes in that has never been here before, or somebody brings somebody and says I wanted them to experience it, it was like open arms. You know, let's hug, because we're going to hug at the end of the night. We might as well hug now, you know. And I think that's true. That's something you see, like, and that's what I covet for our city, you know. I mean, we do it better, but if everyone just had 10% more sense of adventure and would try something they hadn't tried before, there's so many people to meet here. There's so much to experience. Yeah. And I see it. I just want to see more and more of it. You know?
Yeah, we'll keep after it. All of this stuff costs something. It costs time and energy and resources that you got to invest in. And work-life integration is just that. Like, the people that I see do